Monday, I get a text message about the passing of Winnie Mandela, and I ran to Reverend Jackson, so I quickly interviewed him. And then when I saw the schedule that you were going to be here, I said, I know he has something to say about Winnie Mandela, and because your paths surely have crossed.
She was an extraordinarily courageous woman. She kept his memory alive when he was in prison. And she was not well treated while he was in prison. And it was tough for her. But she stood her ground. She was a remarkably strong woman. And I met her several times on my visits to South Africa. And she was always warm and concerned about how the struggle was going stateside, and a good person, and very smart. And as I said before, I keep coming back to it, extremely courageous.
One of the things that I interviewed her in 2010, one of the questions I asked her was the role that women played, and I compared it to the civil rights movement, and how women did not get the credit they deserved. And she said the women and children were huge in taking down apartheid.
Well, I'm not surprised. She is the best testimony for that. She knew better than I did. And so if she said it, I believe it.
You were running Trans-Africa, and obviously apartheid in South Africa was at the top of that agenda. And I remind people what those Polaroid workers did to really kick this divestment thing off. I interviewed Randall, and he said, we didn't know about what was happening in South Africa until they came and told us. And so when you think about Winnie Mandela, Reverend Jackson said the key is, he said, unlike a lot of the other ANC leaders, she never left. She stayed in that country. She faced down those white racists who were in power, who were in those police forces, and who brutalized her.
She might easily have left, but she didn't. And that took some courage to decide to stay. Many left the country during that period, but she didn't. That's the best evidence of what she was made of.
She's called the mother of South Africa. But the shine, if you will, the trial she went through took a lot of that off. Divorcing Nelson Mandela took a lot of that off. But I still say you cannot deny her significance in terms of him getting out of prison and that country becoming free from under colonial rule, from under white rule.
I was on the NBC telecast the day that he came out of prison, and she walked out with him, and how uplifting that stroll that they took together out of that place. She was an incredible woman, and I was always very proud of her, as I was of him, and that they made, I thought, an extraordinary couple. Now, if a relationship doesn't survive 27 years of apartness, well, that's entirely understandable.
Mm-hmm.
Not many marriages, particularly a marriage under the pressure that hers was under, would reasonably have a good chance of surviving that. So I don't think that's any kind of mark against her on the record,
Mm-hmm.
or nor him. It's a long time.
First of all, a lot of marriages don't last 27 years. Talk about being apart 27 years.
Absolutely.
I gotta ask you this here. I was texting someone, and we were talking about MLK 50. We were talking about the condition Memphis is in, Black African Americans with contracts and workers. And I said, you know what? We don't use the word apartheid to describe what we went through. I said, frankly, we should. We talk about Black freedom movement, civil rights movement, we talk about Jim Crow. I said, but the reality is, when you really begin to sit down and look at completely being frozen out of so many sectors, looking at education and so many different things, I use this example in my speeches that if you talk about 1619, 244 years of slavery, Reconstruction, nearly 100 years of Jim Crow. So I said, if you use 19 Kings, King is killed in 68. I said, if you use the marker of 1970, I said, Black folks only been free in this country for 48 years.
When you count backwards from the 1964 Civil Rights Act to the landing of 20 enslaved people in the belly of a slave ship at Jamestown Landing,
Mm-hmm.
we come up with a figure of 331 years. Now, the Jewish Holocaust was 12 years. Our Holocaust was much, much longer than that, in which we lost everything. I was speaking today about having seen Africans arrive on our shores as chattel property. And they were Africans nonetheless, who brought cultures, who brought collaborative cultures, who brought languages, who brought religion, brought all of that with them when they came. When I was born in 1941, I was a Negro. How could that happen? We were Africans in the 1600s, and all of a sudden, we're Negroes. It means that we have lost any linkage to the people who produced us. I had gone to walking down Lee Street in Richmond when I was a teenager, and I'm walking past the First African Baptist Church. And I don't know why this church is named First African Baptist until I learned that it was founded by freed and enslaved people. And but the terrible thing that you do to a people, cutting them off from their cultures and everything else, their history, their story of themselves, is that you take people and make them really totally property. And that property is more valuable to you and more controllable if that property has no contact with any past. So you don't know anything about who you were.
Mm-hmm.
and what you were supposed to do. I mean, it's just consider Frederick Douglass under the slave codes that were in place at the time. If Frederick Douglass had been caught, if he had been caught the first time, he would have been whipped. The second time, he would have had an aura blazed into his cheek. The third time, he would have had his ear cut off. And the fourth time, he would have been castrated. That was what happened to thousands upon thousands of people, after all, in the transatlantic passage, the Middle Passage. Something close to 2 million people died. Now, if this is not a Holocaust, I don't know what is. And at the end of which, you get absolutely nothing. Nothing. And we're talking today at this conference about closing the gap.
Right.
That there are social procedures right now going on at this very moment to make sure that you don't close that gap.
Right. And then when you talk about got nothing, then when those free slaves fought through that and began to acquire land, it's stolen.
Yeah.
It's taken away. And I then take it even further, so that if you take this thing up through 1990s, you get the 2000s, then you begin to look at black home ownership. Then what happens? 2008 hits, home foreclosure crisis. 53% of black wealth wiped out.
Subprime.
So the history is, at every point when black folks here snatched, here snatched,
Yes.
here snatched,
Yes.
and it's this constant having to start over. And so then people go, well, why your neighborhoods got crime? Why is this? Why is that?
Well, you know, the other thing we lost at the same time, you've lost all memory of who you were.
Yes.
And that's important. I mean, I want to see Queen of Sheba. And the queen was played by Gina Lower Brigida. What? All kinds of things like that. I had no idea at the time when I was a child that there had been black pharaohs in Egypt, one of whom built the Great Pyramid, or the hidden the 11th century, 12th century rather, churches in Ethiopia, carved out of solid stone. I mean, so many extraordinary things to see that we had no idea. That Moses' wife, Zipporah, was Ethiopian. We just had no idea of our own story. None, zilch. And that wasn't an accident.
Which is why, last question, which is why when you see this reaction to Black Panther, it is this, to me, it is the equivalent of 1977, the reaction to Roots. But the thing that I keep telling people, folks like, it's made $1 billion. I just got a text in it. I just saw a tweet and just surpassed Jurassic Park as the number 4 all-time grossing film. And folks are talking about the sequels. And what I keep saying is, if you only focus on and know about Wakanda, but then don't go to the next step and begin to research the real kingdoms, not just the ancient kingdoms, but then if you don't bring it present day to realize 7 of the 10 fastest economies in the world right now are African nations, then that just becomes a moment where we get hyped about a movie, but not reprogramming this
Yeah.
because that's the key. You got to reprogram this.
I mean, just think about the great Malian Empire. We knew nothing about this stuff. Zip. And to make it all worse, Carter G. Woodson wrote about this, that many of the leading black institutions in this country, and he wrote this in 1936 or 39, I think. He wrote that these institutions teach courses on ancient Europe, but no courses on ancient Africa.
Right.
And why aren't they doing this? And so we've inhaled the stuff.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. It's in our DNA. It's in our makeup. It's in our, and so it requires reprogramming. It requires going through that to say, let me remove and then let me replace. And I just think that's just one of the things that for me, it has to happen. Otherwise, we are still operating on his story and not history.
That's right. That's right. And what we were talking about today is the point is that while we lost the value of our hide, and that amounted to a lot of money, we're talking about the value of the enslaved people themselves, something like $4 billion. That was as much as manufacturing and railroads put together in the country. It was the largest asset in the country. But that seemed to pale when compared to what you have done to engineer new people.
Right.
To cause them to almost despise themselves.
Yes.
That is the biggest crime of all.
Yep. Randall, we got to talk more.
Okay.
We'll do that.
Let's do that.
We'll do it.
Okay, buddy.
I got to run over to Mason Temple, but we